Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. I'm back with part 2 of this World Series of Poker final table review that was played on GG Poker. Thanks to them for letting me use their footage. We are currently down to 6 players in this tournament. The next person who busts gets $59,000 for this $1,500 buy-in 50 stack tournament, which is why everyone has a gigantic chip stack. We have Jaffe, one of the absolute best poker players in the world, sitting right here. I'm always excited to watch him play. So far, he's made a few interesting decisions, which is good. It's spots where you can observe the best players play and learn from them. So anyway, let's continue going through this hand history. I know we used ICMizer a lot in the first part of this video. If you haven't watched that, by the way, go back and watch it. We'll perhaps use it a little bit less going forward. Here we have a very tiny stack in the big blind. I imagine Oliver's just going to go all in with the jacks. You could also limp. I don't think that'd be insane. And Oliver has an easy call given he is the shallowest of the players remaining. When you have the shortest stack among the players remaining by a decent amount and it's only 5 big blinds, you just have to call off with anything reasonable here. Just a pretty unlucky spot for the Jack-10 of hearts. Normally you're going to be live enough. Very rarely you're just going to be dead pre-flop. He actually has a little bit of outs. It's always nice to have a few outs going to the river, but not this time. So just like that, we are down to 5. Next person out gets $82,000. Notice the chip stacks are starting to creep up a little bit. Now we have a 22 big blind stack, 25 big blind stack, 30 big blind stack, 13 big blind stack, and what's this? 35 big blind stack, 33 big blind stack. So it falls around a small blind who limps with 10-9. That's great. Big blind just checks the Jack-9 of diamonds. You don't want to raise hands like Jack-9 of diamonds pre-flop, because if you raise and your opponent re-raises you, you have to fold, and you really don't want to fold this hand that flops very well. Typically, when you're developing a raising range from the big blind in this spot, it's going to be mostly really good, strong value hands, but also perhaps some hands that are kind of junky that don't really care if the opponent folds, like Queen X offsuit, Jack X offsuit, that has a little bit of a blocker. I think that's probably a reasonable strategy in this spot, especially since Michael in the big blind then can apply pressure to the small blind. Wow, loose raise here by Rodrigo. I think this is very out of line. So far, Rodrigo's been pretty tight. On GG, they have this little number here. That's the VPIP of each person, I believe. So you see 16 is actually very, very low. If it's on fire, it means you're being lucky. If it's this color, it means you're being neutral. And if it's blue, it means you've been unlucky. This heads-up display is not all that relevant because it gives you exactly one stat, right? If you want my heads-up display that you can use, not on GG, but on a lot of other sites, check that out at pokercoaching.com/HUD. It's completely free there. You still have to buy Hold'em Manager, but it's completely free to get my settings. So anyway, Ace-3 opens, and now with pocket sevens, what do you do? Wow. So this is a weird spot because so far Rodrigo's been very, very tight. Given he's been very, very tight, I guess I'd call or fold. Normally you'd probably just be looking to rip it in with his hand, but given Rodrigo's been pretty tight, I think it's actually very viable to just get out of the way cheaply. I think calling's also fine, and turns out the sevens actually does fold, and I do like the fold. You may think, wow, fold sevens, but if your opponents have been really, really tight, as Rodrigo has, you need to adjust. And this is good poker too, by Rodrigo opening up a little bit wide. To be fair, I think Ace-3 offsuit's a little bit too wide. It looks like he's going to get maximally punished this time because Martin's going to rip it in with his ace-king, as he should. But cool spot where sevens, I think, actually is fine to fold. When you have sevens here as well, you also have to worry about running into somebody you have to act some portion of the time. Whereas whenever you have ace-king, there's just one fewer player you can run into who has a reasonably large stack. If it did go raise to 1.2 million and then all in from Oliver, I think ace-king's probably going to be a reluctant fold, but you certainly could call it off there too. You have to think, in that scenario, Rodrigo's just going to be colliding into Oliver a decent amount whenever it goes raise from early position and then jam. So in that scenario, I think you probably just want to sidestep any roughly coin flip spot with the ace-king. You really want to avoid calling it off with roughly 45 to 55% equity at a final table. Here we're definitely going to see a raise from the tens. Notice people using 2.5 big blind sizing. I don't really have a problem with that. Ace-2 suited. Solid hand to play. He does make it 3 million. You definitely have to be careful making it 3 million in spots like this because if you shove, you're going to have a lot of fold equity. Whereas when you make it 3 million, every once in a while you're going to induce your opponent to re-raise you all in with some sort of bluff like Ace-5 suited or Queen-Jack suited or something like that, which would clearly be terrible. Most of the time, though, when you do get jammed all in, you are going to be against a good hand, which allows you to easily fold. But it is miserable to put in 25% of your stack pre-flop with a reasonable suited ace. I think his play is fine, re-raise small and then fold. I don't really mind just straight up jamming it in there, though. That would be a big jam, but it's a pretty strong play that's going to get a lot of folds. Clearly it wouldn't have that time, but it's a pretty strong play. Martin's already shown he can open it up pretty wide, and he's continuing to do that. I'm not sure of the exact replay scenario these players have. If they get to see the final table on some sort of delay, like let's say a 30-minute delay, they're going to start seeing Martin opening up very wide, even off a shallow stack. You can see that in part 1 of this video. So they will start adjusting at some point, you have to think. But he's just going to continue to open it up wide. And I actually don't mind opening it up wide whenever you have a relatively deep stack compared to your opponents. And there's one shallow stack here. Big continuation bet on King 8-7. I wonder if that's an adjustment to bet big, looking to get like maximum fold equity. And if you don't get maximum fold equity, you just check it down. I mean, this is a pretty standard spot to just keep barreling in general, because you have a gut shot with no showdown value. Usually you want to be continuing to bet with your best made hands, like probably king, queen or better here, and then some draws. And the draws you want to bet are the ones that lack showdown value. The problem with this size, though, is that if you get called on the turn or jammed on the turn, it's just miserably bad. Like, you have to fold if you get jammed on, clearly. And if you get called, you can't really know if you have much fold equity at all on the river. I think this is a spot where Martin would have been much better off betting small on the flop, then medium on the turn, and then perhaps jamming the river to give you maximum fold equity on the river. When you bet this big on the turn, if your opponent does call, like, you're kind of in a very bad spot. To be fair, Oliver's in a very bad spot here, too. I want to make that very, very clear. This is not an easy decision with the top pair. Again, I don't know how Martin necessarily has been playing prior to this. I don't know if the opponents even are aware of the screen names, because I know they give you your real name when you get to the final table, which you play under a screen name earlier. But this is a spot where you have a bluff catcher. So is your opponent bluffing too often? If they're bluffing too often, you cannot fold. If they are bluffing way less than they should, then it's an easy fold. So this is a spot where paying attention to your opponent's strategy is very, very important. Like, in theory, if we knew this 26 was actually representative of a very loose, aggressive strategy that's betting flop, betting turn, betting river with too many bluffs across the board, you can't fold the top pair there. But if you know nothing, if you're kind of flying blind, then I think folding there is viable. And Oliver does let it go. Easy all in. Rough spot to call, but I would end up calling here with the ace-7. You have to think Rodrigo should be pretty wide on the button. And you don't love calling with the ace-7 offsuit, because you're usually not all that far ahead, but I think it's a fine call. The only way you can ever justify folding there is if Rodrigo's really, really, really tight. Aces. Ace, queen suited, then the aces. Not going to get any action, though, most likely. So as stacks start to get a little bit closer, perhaps you can start splashing around a bit from the big blind with some weak hands. It's important to realize that when there's a really shallow stack at a final table, you do need to defend your big blind way tighter than you would if there were no payout implications. But once everyone starts to get roughly the same stack size as we have here, you do want to try to see flops and try to make a good hand that can allow you to build your chip stack and sort of differentiate yourself and your stack away from your opponents. Nice raise. Again, this is a scenario where if the opponents know Martin's raising too wide, this is just an easy all-in with the ace-6 offsuit. And any situation where he's raising too wide and then folding too often to a jam. But if you don't know that, you should just fold the ace-6 offsuit. This is a spot where I would definitely defend the big blind. Zhao does call, and just have to check fold the flop. This is a spot where you can also make a small continuation bet. You don't necessarily need to go big. Notice, though, Martin seems to be using big sizes when he wants to fold. I mean, to be fair, we just have a sample of 2 I just saw back-to-back, so it makes it easy to see that kind of thing. I would be interested to see how Martin's playing post-flop when he has a nut hand. He may use very different sizes. It's tough to know. Obviously, though, if you know your opponent bets big with the bluffs and small with the nuts, it makes your life really easy, doesn't it? King, queen off, I would flat. Check fold again for Zhao. It's going to be a rough spot for Rodrigo when he makes a pair. He's probably going to end up checking. Oh, he leads. Wow. Normally you don't see too many leads in multi-way pots and ICM scenarios. Tough spot for Oliver right off the bat. I mean, I guess I would call, but folding's fine too. So whenever you get bet into, your opponent's range is almost always one of 3 types of hands. Either it's a really good made hand, which sevens is dead against, a marginal made hand, which you know, you're either okay against or in bad shape against. If your opponent's leading with an 8, like 8-4, you're in bad shape. If you're leading with, well, 6-3, you're in great shape, right? So you don't really know where you stand in that instance. Or draw. And if your opponent does a draw, you also are not really going to know how to play on various turns and rivers, because does he have the 5-4 or the 6-5 or the ace-5 or the club draw or the 10-9 of diamonds, right? You don't really know what your opponent has. So folding early with 7s like this will definitely make your life a million times easier, and it very easily could just be the right play at a final table scenario with big payout implications, because you want to avoid dicey, roughly break-even spots. And, you know, really easy. It could just be a fold with Zhao in the small blind. That said, small blind Zhao should really not connect with this board at all, really. So it's almost as if Zhao's going to fold this flop the vast majority of the time. Just because Zhao's range is going to be a whole lot of big, high-suited connected type hands that did not want to re-raise / jam pre-flop. So this board's pretty blankish for Zhao. So I think Oliver should probably call the flop and then often call the turn on blank turns. But it definitely does lead to dicey scenarios. Interesting lead by Rodrigo, though. He picks up the pot. Seems to be battling a little bit hard now, as he should when you get to this stage of the tournament. I mean, we're trying to win. First place is $297,000. They're only guaranteed $82,000 at the moment. It's a solid difference. $7-5 suited. It's a hand where you could raise. It's not really the best spot to raise into the big stack. Notice that Martin's sort of differentiating himself between the other 4 stacks. It's going to allow Martin to apply a lot of aggression. As we see, limp and then jam there, right? Just rip it all in. There's not a whole lot Oliver can do about it besides make sure he protects his checking range. But if he just happens to get, or his limping range, but if he just happens to get all sorts of garbage in the small blind for the next like 4 or 5 orbits, he's just going to, well, be in not a very good spot. If y'all enjoying these videos, click like, click subscribe. I would appreciate it. We do a lot of work here at pokercoaching.com, so make sure you utilize it. And if you enjoy it, let me know by clicking like and sharing it with your friends. Here I have a raise, another easy all-in, I think, for Martin. This is a kind of big stack poker I like. Shallow stack raises, all in, all in, all in, all in. Pummel them. And if they're opening anywhere near too wide, they just have to fold a lot. And we see Oliver here still playing 34% of hands. Now, obviously, he was deep stack, or the big stack for a while, so he should play more hands. But I definitely like Martin's just like heavy leaning. Ace-2 offsuit. You can min raise or conceivably just rip it in. I guess we should take a look at ICMizer in this spot, because if we are looking at just a shove or fold scenario, let's see if it is profitable to jam the ace-2 offsuit. Doesn't mean it's the best play necessarily, but let's see if it is profitable. All right, I've entered the scenario. Let's run the program real quick. And you see ace-2 offsuit is actually a pretty plus EV shove, plus 0.04%. Like I said earlier, I'm usually taking all 0.04% shoves or all 0.04 higher and higher shoves in most scenarios. You don't want to be shoving like stone break-even stuff like queen 6 offsuit or jack 8 offsuit unless your opponents are going to call very tightly. To be fair, though, notice each player yet to act is supposed to call, well, only basically like 9s or better, right? 9s or better and ace queen offsuit and ace jack suited and better if you shove. And that's because all 3 players yet to act are very, very shallow stacked. If we edit these players to say they're going to call it just a little bit wider, like let's say they call ace jack offsuit, king, queen, and 8s, right? Just a little bit wider. We're going to edit all of them. Ace jack offsuit, king, queen suited, and 8s. So we go through here, we lock all these people's ranges for this exact scenario. This is ICMizer, by the way. If you want to get access to it, check out jonathanlittlepoker.com/ICM. That is an affiliate link. They'll give me a little bit of kickback if you buy it. But it's a very good program. So notice if we just alter their ranges a little bit, just a tiny, tiny bit, you see that now ace-2 offsuit becomes a fold, right? And with hands like this that really lose a lot of value when you do shove and they call a little bit too often, you very easily could be better off just min-raising. But that said, if you're going to min-raise and you expect to get shoved on a decent amount anyway, maybe you shouldn't even open with a min-raise. But you do want to apply pressure. And you certainly don't want to show them the ace and let them know that you're raise folding ace X. Here we have ace jack offsuit again. Very similar spot to some extent. If you do raise and they get jammed on, let's see what you're supposed to call with. Ace 10 folded, funny enough. Let's see about this ace 10. Well, whatever. We don't need to necessarily take a look. Let's see what's going to happen. Again, I've not watched this. I'm not sure what the opponents are going to do. This seems like an easy all-in to me with ace-10 suited. Very surprised they're not jamming, given Martin is clearly raising a lot of hands. If someone's raising a lot of hands, you just have to fight back. You cannot sit here and just engage in this blind out war, because if you engage in the blind out war, what's going to end up happening is just all of you are never going to win the tournament, and then you're kind of like flipping if you get between 5th and 2nd, and you really don't want that. Easy all in as well. Easy call, I think. This guy should be jamming very wide. You don't love it. I guess we can run this one for you. We're just going to run all these in ICMizer. Why not? ICMizer lesson today. All right, so I entered the stack. So what we have to do is we have to go to raise. Then we have this player goes all in. We put us back here in the cutoff. Now we click ICMize, right? So we're going to have to go through here. We're going to have to change the open raising ranges and whatnot, because this may or may not be accurate. So what do we think we're open raising in this scenario in the cutoff? We saw him raise ace-3 offsuit earlier, so maybe he is capable of getting a little bit loose. Let's give him all suited aces, all pairs. Gotta presume he's raising all pairs, right? All the good suited connectors. Again, it's kind of difficult to know what he's actually going to raise, but let's suppose he's going to go with this, right? Maybe it's right, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not. Now, what do we think this player is going to be? Well, first off, let's just ICMize it, run it like this. What is this player now going to push with? Again, so if this is correct, given he calls off 4.7% of hands, big blind can shove all of this stuff profitably, which is, I think, a little bit too wide. What will he actually jam? This is tough to know, right? I don't think he's going to be insane. You wouldn't think he's going to be insane, right? Definitely hard to know how insane he's going to be, but he's probably not going to be overly insane. We did... Okay, so let's just presume he's going to jam. Maybe he doesn't jam these. Maybe 3-bets these small. Probably jams ace-king suited, right? You got to think he's just going to call a lot of this stuff. So maybe he's doing something like this. Again, who knows what he's actually doing? This is all hypothetical. So we enter the opponent's range. Give it a second to load. Okay. Now, if that's the case, hero should only call off with 10s or better. Wow. So if he's only jamming these hands we have selected with the lock here, only 10s or better can call. So, you know, hey, maybe this is actually a fold based on ICM, which is kind of insane to think about. But if you think Martin's only jamming very good hands, it is, well, very clearly just a fold. Now, what if Martin's jamming substantially wider? What if Martin's like really getting after it because he's the big stack and he's not going to call anything from the small line? He's just going to jam or fold, and he's going to jam a lot. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Again, I don't think this is necessarily realistic. So let me just make him a little bit wider here. Click ICMize again. You see now ace-queen offsuit, still a fold. Wow, I would have called off with the ace-queen here, so maybe I would have made a mistake. The issue here is these 3 other shallow stacks, right? It's kind of crazy to think that if you raise this ace-queen and get jammed on, you're probably supposed to fold. Or at least if you do call, it's certainly not a slam dunk windmill, haha, gotcha, I call. Rodrigo does make the fold, so he's studied his ICM a little bit better than me. Nice fold. I mean, to say it's a nice fold, you just avoided a coin flip. But you really don't want to be coin flipping in these scenarios. Raise here. I mean, Michael just has to be all in here. This seems like an obvious one. If any of these spots are not obvious to you, by the way, get ICMizer and run it. JonathanLittlePoker.com/ICM. We also have a cool sit-and-go quiz feature where you can test yourself in a lot of common close spots with various payout structures, which is very good to helping you learn a lot of these spots that come up somewhat frequently. I mean, if I was shallow, I'd probably just rip it in here again. You got to think Martin's raising very wide. If Martin's raising very wide, you got to rip it in wide. Rodrigo has a fold. Again, this is kind of like that ace-queen offsuit spot, I think, where Zhao's actually been kind of tight recently. I know wow, he called it off. Let's take a look at this. I would not have suspected this was a call. I'm going to run this. Give me a second. All right. We've entered the stacks. Was it the button who's raising? Maybe I already did this wrong. Sorry, cutoff raised. Got to make sure you enter the data properly. Raise to 1500. Fold. Push. Okay. Now we're looking at the right spot. So what should this player be raising with? I mean, we got to think he's raising wide. So what is he actually raising with in this scenario? I mean, goodness gracious. All sorts of stuff, right? I mean, I'd be raising all sorts of stuff in this guy's shoes. Like, almost everything. I'd be doing something like this. Sure. Okay, so now, if we just straight up ran this, what should small blind Zhao push with? You see he should push 75% of hands. You see A7 suited, barely, well, I'm sorry, A7 suited is very profitable. What is he actually going to jam with here? He's been kind of snug in these spots so far. I think he's probably going to jam roughly this, if I had to guess. Maybe he does something like this. Sure. Okay, now we run it again. So now we have a raise, all in. Big blind should now call with this range. Assuming that information I entered is all correct. Big blind should only call with pocket nines or better and ace queen and better. Ace queen off that you see is actually a pretty big punt here. Minus 0.3 is pretty bad. So I definitely do not like the call with ace jack. It's funny you see him make the very good fold with ace queen a second ago, and now you see him making basically call off for all of his chips in a substantially worse spot because Martin's going to have a good hand every once in a while, right? So he calls it off with ace jack. So that's interesting. Anyway, if he does call, cutoff should then call off with, I think it's this number here. Yeah, just jacks are better than ace king, I think. So anyway, very, very surprised to see the call off with the ace jack offsuit. It happens to be great this time. It has Zhao in drawing very, very thin. And, well, jack on the flop. Oh, fun sweat on the river at GG Poker. And just like that, Zhao's out of the game. All right, down to 4. Zhao takes home $88,000. Nice run. We have an open. I would definitely 3-bet regular with the ace jack suit, ace king suited to probably make it, I don't know, 4.8 million or something. He goes pretty big. Martin seems to like big bet sizes. He's really applying it. Queens are great. You may find that once we get down to slightly shorter-handed play, we end up perhaps not having so many exciting hands just because most people are dealt garbage most of the time. So who knows how long this will take. It seems like we have a decent amount of footage left, so maybe we have a long heads-up battle or something. We'll see. I know it started off relatively shallow stacked in this tournament, but tournaments these games quickly do get deep stacked when a few of the short stacks bust. Check bet call on the flop. This is definitely a spot to just check call and play it slowly with the bottom pair. Your hand is the best hand the majority of the time. Looks like Martin just continues to blast. Wow, is Martin about to find his way out of this tournament? This is obviously a pretty great river for Martin, but I think it's actually a check. So this is a neat spot in tournaments where, in this scenario, slow down everybody, slow down. In this scenario, what does Rodrigo's range look like? It looks like a busted flush draw, which is always going to fold, or it looks like a 9, which is probably going to call, or it looks like some sort of draw or some sort of slow played hand that got there. Could easily be 10-9, could easily be 10-6, could easily be 10-2 suited, could easily be 8-7, right? Maybe check raises, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he has the 5-4 that he slow played. In a tournament, when you're talking about putting a lot of your chips in the pot, I think you have to be relatively cautious. And once you get to the river, that very often means not making thin value bets. I do get the idea that Martin is probably drastically over bluffing this spot, and if he is drastically over bluffing, it allows him to value bet thinner. But you definitely want to be somewhat careful making substantial value bets on the river in spots where, yeah, you're ahead a decent amount of the time, let's say maybe 55 or 60% when you get called, but you'd rather just maintain a decent chip stack and not become one of the shorter stacks if you bet and lose, which is what's going to happen here, right? This is one of these spots where if it goes check, Martin wins basically every time, or the majority of the time. But when he doesn't happen to have the best hand and he puts money in, Rodrigo's clearly never folding a better hand. And maybe he calls the worst, maybe he doesn't. Also, Rodrigo could just have backdoor flush draw, right? that they got there. This is one of these scenarios where it's pretty easy for Rodrigo to actually have the best hand, which is clearly not where Martin wants to be. Here we have the raise from Martin again. I guess I would flat here. I think Oliver's playing this a little bit too snug from the big blind. You have to be willing to play pots, especially given Martin has made it very clear he's playing a lot of hands. You can't just sit here and fold all the time, especially when you're in the big blind, closing the action, getting decent pot odds with a reasonable hand. I know he was very dominated in that exact instance, but you're not always going to be dominated. I like to just open shove for Michael with hands like King, Queen, Ace, 10, hands that you don't want to raise and then get jammed on with because you have to fold to some extent, which is certainly not great. 2.5 big blind raise from Martin. I'm not a fan of 2.5 big blind raises from the small blind. I think you're going to get called from the big blind basically every time. Michael decides to lean on him, though, and rip it all in. That's an aggressive shove, but I like it. If your opponent's raising too wide, your adjustment is to jam on them a lot. And Michael has made it very, very clear that he knows how to do that. So nice shoves from Michael here. It's high risk. Sometimes when you get called, you're just out of the tournament. But you also make your opponent slow down a bit, and you apply immense pressure to them to the point that they are usually going to end up folding a little bit too often. Here we have raise under the gun. Under the gun 6-handed, or 4-handed is not the same as under the gun 9-handed. Let's make that really clear. We have charts at pokercoaching.com that discuss how to adjust your strategy based on the number of players at the table, so check those out in the tool section. If you get to the river with 8-7 here, you need to bluff. You have to bluff. Your range includes so many ace-X that will raise under the gun, bet flop, check, turn, and now need to bluff the river. You don't actually have a whole lot of garbage here either. I mean, you have some, but not a lot. And your opponent's, in Rodrigo's shoes, is very often going to have a whole lot of hands like a 6 or a 3. I think you want to bet medium here. Yeah, I like this bet. If you don't need to go all in, because if you go all in, he's just always going to call with an ace and very likely could hero with a king. But if you go medium, he's probably going to fold the 6, which is what you're targeting with a bet anyway to try to get it to fold. So I like that bet size a lot by Oliver. Here we have a raise. I mean, look, again, same story. We just saw Oliver fold this. This would be too tight to fold. I definitely like either calling or jamming. I know jamming is aggressive. I know it's always a disaster whenever you happen to get called, but you need to play this pot one way or the other. And notice here, if you jammed it all in, Martin's probably just going to fold and they'll move on, and Oliver will chip up. Limp from Michael. Michael's opted to use a limping strategy sometimes. He did it earlier, I believe, on the button with some hand. I forget what it was. Ace-5 offsuit, I think. With the 4s, I'd probably just shove it all in. It's definitely a profitable shove. You can ICMizer it if you like. If I was Oliver, I'd limp. It's fine limping here. I actually have a book coming out soon. He's selling at Tough No Limit Hold'em Games, and there's a chapter by Draft Ganger, one of the best online players in the world in tournaments. And his chapter is about playing the medium stack at the final table using a limping strategy. We go through something like 50 hands. It's a lot of hands. Where he is the medium stack using those strategies, and it's very enlightening, discussing when you want to be limping, which hands you want to be limping with, and basically just how to get to play pots as a medium stack on the final table, because when you're the medium stack, you usually have to be kind of tight to outlast the short stacks, and that results in you not winning the tournament all that often. Sure, you take second, third, and fourth a lot, but you don't win very often. By limping and playing some pots, you get to win a little bit more often. Here we have a raise and a call from the big blind. Imagine we'll just see check, bet, small, fold. Bet small. So maybe Martin is using balanced, concealed bet sizes after all. So that's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll be back next week. We'll review a little bit more of this World Series of Poker final table. Again, thanks to GG Poker and World Series of Poker for letting me use their footage. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, if you like me reviewing these World Series of Poker final tables, let me know. Have a great day. Have a great week. Be nice to someone, and I'll talk to you later.